Great, welcome everybody from your busy and amazing days. It's nice this is only my second time in an in-person classroom since we had that shutdown 2 years ago. So this is exciting and a little strange. So welcome. I'm Sarah Fry. I'm a professor in SIFs, and I am very excited to help connect the dots a little bit between the entry ticket that you all completed and introduce our featured guest. So there's a little quote up there, and this very short PowerPoint will be made available to you. So if you would like to actually watch this video where this quote comes from, you will have access to it. This is part of the amazing Native Voices resources that are available for teachers to use with their students. So this statement is part of explaining the concept of erasure, where the stories, experiences, voices of Native people are just kind of generally absent from the experience of the kind of ordinary American. And part of that stems from our K-12 educational experiences. So I'm going to invite you to, this is something one of my students wrote last semester after watching Sitka's video. So just like you all got to see Sitka, this person looked back and thought about her schooling or their schooling, and just kind of pay attention to the font that's in blue. I'll give you a second to kind of take that in. So I am going to invite you now, thinking about what this Boise State sophomore wrote last fall, thinking about kind of disappointments looking back on her education and realizing that what she did learn was mostly in the context of white settlers' experiences, and then being curious after hearing Sitka's voice. Just if any of you can kind of connect with anything that this other Boise State student wrote, would you please do me a favor and stand up? So stand up if anything in those words kind of connects with you. Thank you to the first person who boldly stood up. I was expecting most people to stand. And so most of us can probably look back, and those who aren't standing, I hope that's because you had a really meaningful, rich experience, and you'll note then that you were in a bit of the minority in this group anyway, in terms of having had some really enriching experiences. So thank you. If you'd like to go ahead and sit down, you can. So, and just briefly, I'm just curious, does anybody by chance have Sharon Tennant as a mentor in Boise School District? So I can't resist just really quickly pointing out why I put some stuff in blue. She taught me that our brains latch on a little bit more to things when they're in blue. And so when she would write her agenda on the board, she would always write keywords in blue, like 3 or 4 keywords, and then put a box around them because it helps our brains. So I always try to do that with what I most want people to focus on. So a little side note. So again, this particular slide is from the curriculum, the training for teachers that is available to all of you. And so there was a study at Penn State by faculty at Penn State University that found that 87% of the content that students were learning about Native Americans was pre-1900. So one of the things that I am so excited about with this Native Voices project is how it brings contemporary experiences of Native youth into the forefront, and we get to hear their voices and get to help avoid unintentionally teaching a misconception that Native people were just in the past, and if they are still around, they still live in teepees, all of them, even if they're not from the plains and places where that was a structure that was practical and feasible. So I got to read the responses. I was stunned by how many of you accurately knew what the Indian Child Welfare Act was. I was not at all surprised by how many of you were like, I don't know. I don't know. So it was passed in 1978 with the goal of keeping Native children with their families and in their communities. there had been a real problem with children who were experiencing a disrupted childhood with their birth family being in a challenging situation of continued caregiving, where those children would then be adopted out or foster cared out to families that were not Native. And there's a lot of research that supports the strength that happens when people are able to stay in their communities and be with extended families. So it's a really important piece of legislation. And on this slide, which you'll get, there's also a link to a really interesting podcast series that explains some of the contemporary challenges that the Indian Child Welfare Act faces, including some ongoing litigation that's making its way through the Supreme Court. So if you're at all curious about contemporary Native people, I highly recommend kind of taking a look at those notes. So a third of you guessed right or knew that the ruling that helped to really promote a sense of tribal sovereignty when it comes to owning reservation land happened in 2019. The consenting, or the majority opinion, was delivered by Supreme Court Justice Neil Gorsuch, and it's really written really beautifully. I loved the beginning, that on the far end of the Trail of Tears was a promise, and there's a whole lot of kind of craziness behind this decision, but the Supreme Court ruled in favor of tribal sovereignty and tribal reservation land because we hold the government to its word. So for those of you who guessed right, great. For those of you who didn't have a clue, part of those kind of questions was to get you just thinking about potential gaps in your knowledge that are not your fault at all, but a result of educational opportunities you have not had. And then the rest of the questions were to get you kind of thinking in ways that our special guest tries to get youth from marginalized backgrounds to think of when she's working in film. So I am so excited to bring Steph Cullen forward to share with us more. And welcome.
Aloha. Welina e nahoa. Welcome, my friends. All right, before we really get started this afternoon, I need to be transparent and admit that I am incredibly uncomfortable right now. One of the questions we asked in your entry ticket was, think of a time when it felt uncomfortable or even safe for you to use your voice or share your opinion, and what did that feel like? It probably felt a lot like what I am feeling right now. And I have done a lot of things that have made me feel very uncomfortable, but I've also spent a lot of my life hiding in comfort, probably due to the uncomfortable situations that I faced growing up. So, as I was talking to my personal trainer this morning, I see him 5 times a week, about how nervous I am that I have to speak to a large group of people this afternoon. I say this from experience, that I'm speaking to all of you. What I am doing right now and speaking to all of you right now is harder than deadlifting twice my weight. Whew, I'm sweating. And I don't sweat that much when I lift that much weight either. After my trainer put more weight on the bar this morning, he said, comfort is an addiction that inhibits growth. And he is absolutely right. He also fancies himself a speaker as well. I am addicted to comfort, and if any of us want to grow, we need to experience discomfort. Growth is where the magic happens. Your students are also going to face uncomfortable situations, and it is our job as educators to lean into their discomfort and experience it with them. Growth is where the magic happens. Your students are also going to face uncomfortable situations. And so I invite all of you to stand up, shake it out with me, please. Turn to your neighbor and tell them about something that makes you feel uncomfortable. I'll give you a couple of minutes on that.
Very impressed that you can deadlift double your weight.
We just did that a couple weeks ago. And you can see it in my hands. They get so worn.
Where do you lift?
I do it at Johnny's Fit Club, which is on Vista. And my trainer is a national champion in strong lifting. And I did my first meet last year, my first competition. I came in 4th out of 4, and that's okay because I was the smallest and the oldest in my whole group. But I did it.
That's amazing. How long have you been?
3 years.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
Twice your blood. That's impressive.
Thank you. All right, we were about 30 seconds out of my 2 minutes.
Okay. That's brilliant using the timer.
Yeah. I learned that from Trina, actually.
She does a lot of this.
She does, yes.
And not necessarily with eager audiences, which this largely is. She might sometimes have captive audiences who are less.
All right. That was awesome to hear all the noise in here. We also asked you to think of a time when someone thought something about you because of the way you look on the outside or what you were wearing, yet they were wrong or didn't know the full you, and we asked what did that feel like. My name is Stephanie Michelle Lokalani Cullen, Steph for short. I am a Kanaka Maoli, which means Native Hawaiian, filmmaker, and storyteller. I would like to acknowledge the Treasure Valley as the Aboriginal homelands of the Shoshone, Paiute, and Bannock tribes, known as the Boise Valley people. Mahalo nui loa to my Indigenous sisters, brothers, and friends. Thank you. Ooh, can you show the picture? Okay. That's me in the middle. That is a picture of me and my cousins, Justin and Jonathan. We were maybe 4 or 5 in this photo. I grew up with these kids, and while none of us live near each other anymore, we still follow each other on Instagram and do the whole like thing, sometimes comment. Around the time that this photo was taken, I knew nothing of color or racism until I started kindergarten in Hawaii. I have lived in Idaho now for almost 17 years. Prior to that, I was in Anaheim and San Francisco, Grand Junction, Colorado, and I graduated high school in Federal Way, Washington, just south of Seattle. And no, my family was not in the military, we just moved a lot. I was born and raised for 9 years in Hawaii on the island of Oahu. I grew up in the country near the North Shore in a little town called Hauula. My tutu, or grandma, still lives there. My cousins, my aunties, all my uncles, they all still live there. But for me and my family of 6, I'm the oldest of 4, we left Oahu in 1989 for a better life. My dad wanted us kids to have a future, so he took us out of the islands and planted us in dark and rainy Washington State, where my mom grew up. It was a really big change for all of us. I'm not just from Hawaii, my family is of the islands. An Irishman, way, way back in the day, named Steph Cullen, hopped on a boat from Ireland and landed in Hawaii, where he met my 100% great, multiple greats grandmother, Kupau. Their land extended from one mountaintop to the next in a great valley called Waiahole, which is just on the other side of the mountain from where they shot Jurassic Park. I learned this when I went back in, what year was that? I think it was 2016 for my papa's funeral and celebration of life. So as a filmmaker, knowing that our land was on the other side of Jurassic Park is pretty awesome. All of that land belonged to my family. But when Sylvester died and Kupau had to take care of her family, she started selling off the land piece by piece, until all we had left was a little cemetery where they and their children are buried. Today, it is managed by a Catholic church, and whenever I go visit, I stop by the site to pay my respects to my ancestors and leave a lei on their headstones. It's fun to say that I know where the original Cullens were buried. It's a little Twilight joke. And I tell you all of that because I know that I look like a white woman minus the vampire sparkles. 17 years in Idaho and 33 years on the mainland will do that to a person. Sylvester was Irish. My last name is Irish. My dad is Irish, Hawaiian, Filipino, and Chinese. My mom is a mixture of German and English, and probably a few other things. Growing up in Hawaii, I was too white. I was not invited to play with any of the Hawaiian kids unless they were my cousins. And although most of us refer to each other as cousins today, back in the 80s, it was pretty obvious that the haole was not your cousin. My cousin Justin, the one who's sitting next to me with the soccer ball in that picture, he actually still introduces me to people today as his haole cousin. And it doesn't feel very good at all. When I moved to the mainland in 1989, I was too brown. And nobody wanted to be my friend because I was different. I was only in 3rd grade. My teacher that year told me that I sounded stupid and needed to get rid of my accent. That's why I am so articulate today, or that's at least what I say. I typically pronounce words wrong because I grew up speaking Hawaiian Pidgin, and when my teacher told me that I had to change the way I spoke, I sounded out every single letter in every single word so that I wouldn't sound stupid. Penitentiary, obscenity. And I only mentioned that word because I'm studying law and ethics in grad school right now, and every time I talk about my class, people correct me on the usage of that word, or the pronunciation of it, I should say. But look at how they're spelled. I'm pronouncing every single letter in every single word. Just like I was taught when I was 9 and found myself experiencing racism for the 2nd time in my life. As an adult, and I am nearing 42 now, I have been called dirty because I'm not quite white enough. And when I go home to Hawaii, I try to tan ahead of time so I look a little more Hawaiian and Filipino. While we students of color have grown up in the United States, we still have different experiences. As a board member and video creator for the Kessler Keener Foundation here in Boise, I had the privilege and the honor of traveling around Idaho last year to interview Native youth from various Idaho reservations. We went to Lapawai, Fort Hall, Plummer, and Duck Valley. The goal of this project was to interview Native youth about their experiences in school, growing up Native, what they want to be when they grow up, what their favorite subject is, and finally, what they want non-Natives to know about Native students. And they all had very different yet similar stories to tell. One student, Sitka, whom I met in Duck Valley, talked about how he's treated when he goes into town. And I've heard that you all watched his video, which is good. He's such a great kid. Not included in his video is a story about how he gets made fun of when he goes to the grocery store. And he's just a boy, and he's already faced enough racism in his life in his own town. All he wants to do is garden and bead and play basketball and hang out with his family. Another student, Danny, who lives in Boise, talked about how he was bullied in school. He is from the Selawik tribe in Alaska. I know his mom from the job I used to work at, and his entire family is just absolutely amazing. But because of the bullying, Danny turned to Taekwondo to help manage his anger. The other students are soccer players, artists, poets, and volunteers for their local Native nonprofits. Maialu is from the Nez Perce tribe, or Nimipu tribe. And when I first put her video together, I included her work with NAHOVA, which is Native Americans Hear Our Voices Arise. It's a nonprofit that focuses on mental health, suicide prevention, and gender identity on her reservation with Native youth. As we, the board, considered the age group that we were creating these videos for, which are 4th graders, we decided that it would be best to remove the piece about mental health, suicide prevention, and gender identity, as it doesn't align with Idaho state standards for 4th graders. In realizing and understanding that, we've given a deeper look into these students and how we as adults, teachers, allies, and friends need to approach them, and these issues that they face, which we know very little about. So what we're going to show is Maialu's original cut, which is not on the website or our YouTube page. I feel so blessed that I got to meet all of those students last year. And heading into this year, we're getting ready for phase 2. We haven't decided how many students we're going to interview, but we'll be going all the way up to Kootenai tribe, which is way up north. I've never been up there. 17 years in Idaho, and I've never been that north. So that'll be awesome. And actually, a little plug, if any of you know any Native students that may want to be in a video, please send them our way, because it would be awesome to talk to them. Sarah, will you go to the website? So I'll go over really quickly. This is our KesslerKeenerFoundation.org website. But on it, you'll find all the videos that we shot of the students. And then also there is a education section on there, and a Native teacher named Val Miller and her daughter Elise, who just graduated with her teaching degree, they put together all the curriculums that you can find on the website. And it goes into questions, and it kind of introduces it the way Sarah introduced our session today. And then along with phase 2, we're going to be identifying more of the local Idaho tribes and really delving into their history and talking about life. So yeah. Sure.
I just really quickly wanted to say, when I first looked at the lesson plans, I was amazed, because I wasn't familiar with the educator who developed it, so I didn't know what to expect. And her background is special education,
I think so.
I believe. And so, for how many of you in here are dual major special education? Do I have any? Yeah, y'all know so much, right, about how to get all kids supported and excited and able to learn, and that's what it comes out in these lesson plans. It's really amazing. I was extra impressed.
Yes. Yeah, actually Val is taking, I think she's taking a year off to take care of her parents right now, but she was a teacher in CUNA. And so, yeah, Val's amazing. A few years ago, I was asked to shoot a video about a young boy who had cancer. I drove all the way out to Caldwell and set up my camera and started talking to him. Within the first 5 minutes of me asking him about his journey with cancer, he started crying. I've never had cancer myself. I've known people who have, but no one's close enough to know how to respond to that situation that I had found myself in. I stopped rolling the camera, I stopped asking him questions, and I waited for his mom and dad to comfort him. And while they were crying together, I made a few decisions so that we could continue shooting the video for the nonprofit that was sponsoring it. Once he felt ready enough to look at me again, I asked if he wanted to be the director of our film that day. I gave him my clapboard, I told him what button to push to start recording, and I whispered in his ear, "Now say action." He shouted action like the next Steven Spielberg. It was amazing, and it helped us finish shooting that video. I tell you all of that because when we walk into various situations and conversations with students, we're not going to know what to say or do in response to their own reactions to us or the situation at hand. Something my therapist taught me a few years ago was that instead of reacting, we need to work on our response. How do we respond, not react, to these students when they feel like they're in a position that they can't defend themselves? How do we take a potentially difficult situation and turn it into something better? How do we, as someone who has never experienced their lives, work through this with them? The situations may not always work out, but we can always try. Titus became a director of epic films that day in Caldwell. In 2020, I found out that he passed away from cancer. He didn't even make it to junior high school. But we got to experience something together, and I think he had fun that day. This past week, I had the privilege of shooting some video footage for Open Arms Dance Project and the Wasmuth Center for Human Rights. Through this project, I have met Hava, a woman who is a dancer with cerebral palsy and an ambassador for Open Arms. She and her dance instructor and founding artistic director of Open Arms, Megan, have been visiting 2 schools in the area to teach second graders about how to be an upstander through dance. They open each session with an introduction to Hava, then they talk about how to be inclusive and an upstander against bullying, how to respond to people who are in a wheelchair, and how to make them feel welcome and acknowledged. After a 2.5-hour dance class, most of those 30-plus students walked up and gave Hava a hug. Some of them even gave me a hug, which was so unexpected. But that's what they just learned, how to be inclusive to everyone inside the room, including the person behind the camera. These students, people, whether Native, Black, Asian, have a disability or other, are all just people. Growing up can be hard enough. Being open and listening to your students is the best thing that you can do for them. Instead of saying, "You sound stupid, get rid of your accent," change the dialogue. Ask them where they're from, what's their favorite food, and who's their favorite singer. You'd be surprised to find that we all have way more in common than we realize. My trainer summed it up perfectly before I walked out of the gym this morning. He encouraged us to enjoy being uncomfortable. I am still uncomfortable. I'm sure you can hear it in my voice, and I'm just about done. I have found comfort for the last 10 years at my corporate job. On February 1st, just about 2 weeks ago, I broke my addiction to that comfort, and I took a leap from my secure paycheck and benefits, and I am now a full-time freelance filmmaker called OMG Female Filmmakers. I help tell the stories of these students and anyone else that needs a platform to share their experience. Being a student is hard enough as it is, and it is up to us to step up and be that comfort for those students in their time at school and in life. Let's get uncomfortable with them. Do we have time for some questions? I can start with my favorite singer. It's Pink. My favorite food is poi. What is poi? Poi is ground up taro root. It's gray, and very few people actually like it, but I do. And I like to put it on, we call it lau lau. And what that is it is meat. It can be pork or fish. I go with the fish. And it's wrapped in taro leaves and then wrapped in banana leaves and cooked that way. And so when you get it, you have to take the banana leaves off because you can't actually eat those. Any other questions? I can answer about those students a lot better than myself.
I do have a question about yourself, though.
Okay.
So when you shared the picture of you with your cousin, and you said that he still introduces you as your Howley cousin, have you ever been able to have a conversation with him about that, or is that not it? Like, families are so complicated. I'm sure everyone in this room has a complicated family member. Is that a conversation that can happen, or?
Yeah, I have, and he's still, because they're on the islands, and so that's just how it is over there. That's what they call their white cousins. And even so, when our papa passed away, both he and I shared the eulogy, and I even talked about it. Our papa, actually, I can go into that story. One time, so like I said, growing up in Hawaii, it was different. And one time, my cousin Justin and I were sitting in the kitchen with, doing homework or something, and we started making fun of white people. So I actually grew up, after I was treated that way, I started making fun of white people. And Justin and I were throwing around the term Howley back and forth, and our papa walked in, and papa is the Irish Hawaiian. And he was like, "Hey, what are you kids doing?" And we're like, "We're talking, Papa, we're joking, we're making fun of Howleys." And he was like, "No, you can't do that." And we were like, "Why, Papa? Everybody at school makes fun of them." And he said, "Hold on a second, you two look at me." And my papa is white. The dark comes from my dad's mom, who's Filipino. And he was like, "I'm white, and when you guys say that, you're hurting me." And so that's when I learned the first lesson of, don't listen to the kids at school. And that racism does really hurt when it comes from, especially on both sides. You're welcome.
Great. Nothing to be nervous.
Oh, thank you.
It was wonderful.
Oh, yes.
Okay, so that was some wonderful information that we received from Stephanie. A lot of things to think about. What we want you to do now is to think about how what you just heard can apply to your teaching, apply to your planning, apply to your SPAT units that you're creating. And what we're going to ask you to do is everybody has a large Post-it note in the middle of the table. I was so excited to get those out again today. And you've got a marker. Let's have a designated scribe at each table so we're not passing it all around. And you also have a list of some culturally responsive strategies or pedagogies that you might try in some of your lesson planning. So what we'd like you to do is brainstorm some ideas that you might be able to implement in your classroom in the next few weeks. You could talk about it, you can brainstorm your ideas, and I'm going to have Sarah come up and talk for just a moment about some things that we want to think about when we're doing, because we want you to think deeply about this. So Sarah's going to talk to you a little bit about some things we might want to avoid.
It's so hard because I know it's really good to try to frame things in the positive, but I know there are some things I want to invite you to avoid. I'm going to frame the first one in the positive, though, which is really focus on minds-on kind of activities and learning. And a non-example of that is I once was working with a student teacher who wanted to have students take brown bags and crumple them up and then smooth them out and pretend they were buffalo hide and then copy symbols from Native peoples that they liked and thought would look nice on this paper. And this was going to be their kind of culminating activity for a unit on Idaho's Native people. So I guess I would challenge you to think about whenever we're invited to do something that's kind of crafty and fun, where is it also deepening learning and understanding and some of the skills that we need to teach kids? Because that non-example isn't doing that. And it also enters into an idea of appropriation, where we're kind of taking and trying to use symbols that might have been sacred, symbols that in this case actually weren't even associated with the Idaho peoples that had just been studied, but with another Native population. And so to really be thinking too about how can we learn about any population in a way that we're really being respectful of their culture and not kind of engaging in unintentionally disrespectful use. Because the student teacher that I'm referring to didn't realize, and we had the unit went in amazing places. We had some really good conversations, but I think that's kind of a focus on always be helping kids be developing skills that they're going to need across content areas and try to avoid appropriation.
Go in and participate in an exit ticket on today, and it's going to ask you, one of the things it's going to ask you to do is to really commit to a strategy that you took away that you're going to plan for in the next few weeks. Okay, and this is going to be, people kept asking about the attendance sheet. Where's our attendance sheet? The exit ticket is going to be our record that you were here today. So I hate to disrupt the wonderful conversation, but now we want to get that individual feedback from you. So if you could participate in that. And as liaisons, we look forward to watching these lessons and watching you enact these strategies in the next few weeks. So thank you very much for coming, and thank you to our guests. Let's give Sarah and Steph. And we'll just bring it down now so you can complete the exit ticket. Thank you.